The 2005 Atlantic hurricane season was the most active in recorded history, spawning a record 28 named storms, 7 of which would go on to become major hurricanes. 2 of those 7 were destined for landfall along the Louisiana coast. Hurricane Katrina made landfall on August 29th near the mouth of the Mississippi River, and Hurricane Rita, which at one point was the 4th most intense hurricane ever recorded in the Atlantic Basin, made landfall near the Texas-Louisiana border on the morning of September 24th, causing an estimated $10 billion in damage. Since that time, the cities and towns of southwest Louisiana and southeast Texas have cleaned up and rebuilt. But a small part of the pain and perseverance of that time lingers on in the hearts and minds of those who lived through it. Hurricane Rita is considered by many who were in its path to be something of a forgotten storm, overshadowed by the extraordinary death and destruction wrought by Katrina just weeks before. But while the death toll wasn't as high, the cuts on the lives of those impacted by Rita were just as deep, and the lingering scars just as vivid. Now, a decade later, forecasters here at the National Weather Service, who were on the front lines of warning the public about the impending disaster, look back on the days leading up to Rita's landfall and their personal experiences both during and after the storm.
You know, the forecast track for Rita was one of those events where it was super difficult. It started out with a projection of a landfall over in Florida. It swung all the way across the Gulf Coast to Texas. And then the days leading up to the event, it went from literally Corpus to the Houston, Galveston area. Eventually we thought it was going to hit the Beaumont, Port Arthur region, but then ultimately it ended up making landfall in Cameron Parish.
One of the state officials asked me, he said, well, what's the chance of it going into Louisiana? And I remember thinking, well, it should be going straight across the Gulf and into South Texas, or maybe even up towards Galveston or Corpus Christi area. I said, but you have to kind of wait and watch. I said, but the big key will be for this hurricane is if it starts slowing. So if it starts slowing, it's going north.
The preliminary track forecast kept showing Matagorda Bay, especially when it entered the Gulf. But when it maxed out at Category 5 at 180 miles an hour, it slowed up a little bit, and all of a sudden the next forecast bundle, or I guess family of tracks, kind of shifted a little bit further. It was like a little bit further north of Matagorda Bay. Then it was at Freeport. Then it was at Houston. And I believe it was probably by that Wednesday, I was pretty much fearing that it could do this because of past histories of what the models have been doing the last few years. They were always seemed like it had more of a Western bias at the time. I mean, it did the same thing with Lily in 2002.
I don't think I was really confident in it until, I believe it was Thursday, because the storm made landfall like early Saturday morning, if I remember right, like after midnight Friday into early Saturday morning. And so I think it was Thursday, and that morning was when I made the decision to evacuate my wife and kids and get them out of Lake Charles. So I think at that point I was pretty confident that we were going to see a significant impact.
Did your family evacuate?
Yeah, my husband, I sent him up to his mom's house, and she's in southeast Oklahoma. And that was interesting because it took him about 12 hours to get up there, which normally takes about 6.
Did you want to evacuate yourself?
I did. I was wanting to leave, and I actually even asked our boss, Steve Reinert, if maybe we could, since I was hydrologist at the time, maybe go up to the Sabine River Authority office and maybe try to do my job from up there, but he didn't really want anybody leaving the office that was, anybody that was already here, he wanted them to stay.
We discussed internally whether or not we as an office should evacuate or not, and at one point when Rita was a Category 4 still, we were seriously considering evacuating, having our backup offices perform the forecasts for our area, but ultimately our regional office decided for us that they wanted us to stay here.
Now you can make the argument that, well, we're not doing much good, to the public while we're here, while the hurricane's actually making landfall and affecting the area. And that's true to some degree, although I still believe, that we do maintain contact with the emergency management personnel. We can, provide them information in terms of, is it safe for you to go out? Because a lot of them have wind speed thresholds. We will not venture out if the winds reach this certain point. It's okay for us to venture out when they drop below this point. When are the really bad winds going to get here so that even we need to hunker down? And so there are still people reliant on us to provide information.
So leading up to a hurricane event, we're doing conference calls, email alerts and whatnot to people all across the community of the 6 counties in southeast Texas and the 16 parishes here in Louisiana. So we're on conference calls with everyone from the governor all the way down to the local elected officials to first responders across the area. There may be, on the conference call itself, there may be a couple hundred people on it, but inside of these different EOCs across the area, when you add it all up, there'll be tens of thousands of people literally on our conference calls. And so it's interesting on how you can keep that many people quiet on a conference call. So there's a way to mute everyone else's phone lines when you're doing these conference calls. Well, we did have a little situation because one of the employees here had his pet dog, a poodle, in the office, and it was very nervous, as poodles tend to be, and it was barking in the background. So it was kind of funny during one of the briefings I was doing that people kept on saying, someone needs to get their dog to be quiet, and it was actually a dog that was sitting next to me because of the coworker's dog that was nervous in the office.
That little poodle was obnoxious and everything, and he barked a lot, but it didn't bother me that much having animals in the building because I love animals.
The storm started turning northward, and I was talking to the governor, and I really felt sorry for her because Hurricane Katrina had just devastated New Orleans area, and now we had another major hurricane that was bearing down on Louisiana. It just didn't seem fair. 2 hurricanes in, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, was it? So she said, well, where's it going to? At that time, it looked like it was going into Lake Charles. Well, I said, it looks like it's going towards Lake Charles, and then guidance is suggesting that it's going up to Shreveport, stalling and dropping 9 to 10 inches. And I remember feeling sorry for her because she was dealing with so much devastation in the New Orleans area, trying to work through that she had this other storm coming in. And I remember she said something very interesting. She said, am I going to have a state left at the end of this?
I remember actually the time leading up to it as probably being more stressful than anything. After the fact, it's already done. Then you're just kind of dealing with the aftermath, But, fielding the questions, beforehand, not only from emergency management personnel and public officials, but even from the public. Everyone wants to know, is it coming here? Do I need to evacuate?
You always have that little bit of excitement and adrenaline rush before a storm, and that makes you do your job better. But yet you have that fear factor and always worrying about the worst that could happen. And having seen what happened with Katrina just 3 weeks before, we all had that in our minds and what could possibly happen because it was such a large storm and it was growing as it was getting towards us. So a number of us were pretty scared before this storm came, and we were actually so thankful that it was starting to weaken, but the wind field did not, and we were still in fear of what it could do. Honestly, most of us hadn't really experienced this storm before a hurricane. I think maybe a couple of people in the office had experienced hurricanes the previous decade. I hadn't experienced a hurricane since 1985, since Danny, and that was just a Category 1. So having a Category 3 coming at you, that's kind of a different feeling.
I remember the only time in my life actually videotaping my house. I guess I was a bit more concerned about this one than any other one. So I actually walked around the night before the storm hit, 24 hours or so before it hit, I guess, and videotaping everything, so I had some sort of physical record of what was in my house.
We were hunkering down here in the office. There's probably over 20 people in the office. Besides employees, we had a few spouses, we had a few pets in the office as well. And we do have very secure storm shutters to cover all of our windows and our front glass door. So there's only literally one door in and out of the building, a very strong, secure door in the back of the building here. So we were all hunkered down here in the office. And as the event was unfolding the night of landfall, my boss asked me to make a list of everyone in the building so that in the event something bad happened, we lost power, the building collapsed, that we'd have a list of everyone in the building for the first responders that would come in to be looking for us.
So you're here in the building, and describe the storm itself as you experienced it as it was making landfall.
What was interesting is that you always hear people say about sounded like a freight train. Well, this was like a freight train that went on for like 8 hours because it was basically just a roaring sound nonstop. Once the first intense, tropical storm, the hurricane force wind started to hit the office, it was basically very loud, roaring type sound. In fact, when we were trying to talk to each other, we'd almost be yelling at each other just so we could hear each other. And when we'd answer the phones, also the same thing. I'd almost feel like I'd be yelling at someone on the phone just because you almost couldn't hear yourself if you weren't yelling.
And that loud wind sound continued literally for over 12 hours until the following morning before it finally died down enough where we could talk in a normal tone again. When I was doing the briefings and the conference calls, a lot of people that were on the calls said that the thing that was most remarkable to them was to hear me yelling over the wind, screaming in the background on the conference call. So it was just a surreal event to go through all this really super loud wind. It was banging things around because some of the ductwork for the heating and air conditioning unit here in the office was having wind being sucked into it and sucked out of it. So ceiling panels were moving around and bouncing around and made funny noises, and you didn't know if the ceiling or the roof was fixing to collapse on you.
Just the sound of the roof caving in every few minutes from the gusts of wind blowing through the eaves upstairs. That's what I remember the most, I think, from during the storm itself.
Were you ever worried at any point that there would be flooding in the building or that the building would come down on you?
I was probably more concerned with the building stability just because the slamming sounds. I don't know if it was stuff physically hitting the building, which I can't imagine that was it because we're kind of in the middle of nowhere out here. I imagine it's just the wind gusts blowing through like the vents or whatever it is that are upstairs, on the exterior of the building. I don't know. I guess to this day I have no clue what I was hearing, but something kept making these sort of metal sounding slamming sounds up in the attic and the eaves of the building. And so that was unsettling. Kind of made you wonder if the building was going to make it through the storm.
I didn't really worry too much about the building getting flooded. I was a little concerned about the roof, especially when the wind started picking up, because you can actually hear a lot of rattling going on up in the roof area. So it was a little unnerving at times just hearing the wind howling up there and wondering, if the building was going to be okay.
One of the main things that we were worried about here in the office was originally the winds blowing from the east, because our weather radar, the Doppler radar, is on the east side of our building. And so we knew that, in the event of strong enough winds that potentially the top of the radar tower could collapse. And if it did, it was probably going to land on top of our building, specifically in our operations area where most of the people were located. So every time you heard a sound, you thought, is this part of the radar collapsing now? And we have a computer screen that just monitors the radar, so we knew the radar was working the whole time, and that gave us a little bit of security that nothing was probably falling on top of us from outside.
At one point during the height of the storm, probably around 2, we had basically some water come across the central part of operations, and it basically came in like a bucket.
There was like I think one of the flaps on the building or something like that kind of came up with the winds, and some water did come into the operations area, so that kind of upset some people, or a couple of people, and so we did get gone into a meeting with the MIC and everybody in the operations area.
In retrospect, when they did the roof of this office, that's when they said it was probably an inch away from peeling off. So some people, more than others, panicked. We all in natural reaction going, what's going on? Because between us and the operations, there's not much but Celotex ceilings. So we hear everything. So it got quite loud in here.
I remember watching Channel 7. We had our TV on and we were watching Channel 7 doing their broadcasts from the, I want to say it was like the third floor of the hospital downtown. And they were sitting there doing their thing, and they didn't have electronics either, so they were using little signs, holding up signs with the information on it, like tornado warning for. And it's very interesting, including one of our future interns was working at the TV station at the time, Mike Griffin. So, and he was trying to do live reports out there on Shell Beach Drive when the wind was picking up, and he couldn't do it for very long because the winds were getting too strong. And that was just tropical storm strength storm winds at the time.
The most stressful part of the event for me is just the unknown of knowing whether or not you're going to literally live through the night. It was, just a lot of mental tendency. That's not the right word to describe it. The biggest problem for me with Hurricane Rita, and the scariest part for it, was just all the loud sounds that were going on besides just the roar of the wind, the sounds of things hitting the roof and hitting the building. While I was lying down in my boss's office at one point, I put my arm up on the wall, an exterior wall, and you could feel it vibrating. So, and that was a brick wall. And, it was pretty disconcerting to feel a brick wall vibrating because it really made you wonder how much more before this wall is going to collapse on us. So a lot of uncertainty in terms of how good is this building going to hold up during an event, because it had never been threatened, of course, before by a high wind event.
So I ended up staying here that Thursday night and the entire day Friday, right before landfall. And I was up probably through 6 a.m. Saturday morning. And then finally, the body was starting to shut down after being up for 48 hours with maybe only 4 hours sleep. And I got a couple hours sleep that morning from about 6 to 8. But it was very hard to even try to go to bed because the wind was still howling. Even at 8 a.m. when they woke me up for my eye shift, the wind was still howling just as loud as it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's what really got to me. That's when it really hit me how big this storm was. Because most of the hurricanes did not last this long. You got to remember, we didn't start getting hurricane force winds until Friday afternoon or Friday evening. So by that time, we were already 10 or 12 hours into hurricane force winds, which is a long time, especially for this area. Probably hadn't seen that duration since Audrey in '57.
The storm rolls through and you get your first look at the results afterwards. Describe what you saw and how you felt.
It was overwhelming seeing how much damage was done. I mean, just because it was so widespread.
One of the first things that we were going to do was do a storm survey to see how bad the damage was across the area. And so we knew one of the worst places to go would end up being Lower Cameron Parish. So working out a effort with the local emergency manager in Cameron Parish, we met up at a local wildlife refuge, which was kind of their temporary emergency center. And to even be allowed to get down into Lower Cameron Parish, we were literally lined up along a wall with a nurse who came along with a needle to give us a shot for TB and for tetanus because of all the sharp objects that potentially we could scrape ourselves with. They didn't want any of us to catch anything like that. So we all got a shot. We would pile in the back of an ambulance truck. And as we drove down into Lower Cameron Parish, it was incredible to see the amount of damage that the storm surge had caused and actually pushed all that debris up along the edge of the intercoastal waterway.
The whole experience, though, when I went down to look at the coast there in Cameron, it was truly, when people say, they use the expression, wiped clean by the hand of God, I never quite grasped what that really meant, wiped clean by the hand of God. Okay, that means that everything is gone. There's nothing there.
So here we are crossing the big bridge to get into Lower Cameron Parish, and as far as the eye can see, you're seeing debris everywhere. And when you get down at the base of the bridge, the pile of debris that you could see for miles, when you're on top of the bridge, now you're driving through it, and it felt like you were going through a tunnel because the debris was probably piled 10, 15, 20 feet high. And it was like driving through a tunnel from the Intercoastal Waterway all the way down into Creole, and but there was nothing standing once we got down to Creole.
There was what we call a debris line that was about, at times, 20 feet tall and about 50 yards wide. And it's just all the debris from the coast and the homes and just everything. It was piled up together. And their idea was to go out there, initially the hazmat crews was to go out there and dig up these piles and move these piles. But they found out real quickly that this was not going to work. What they ended up doing was they went out there to these piles and started burning them. And that was about the best way to handle it, because if you think about it, you got these piles that went for miles. You just can't move a pile that is 50 yards wide and 20 yards tall. That's 10 miles long. You'll be there for years. What they found was happening was, after they burned it, it started sinking into the marsh. So their solution in the end was to go ahead and burn the debris pile and let it sink. And that's exactly what has happened since.
So we're driving from Creole over to downtown Cameron, and the guys in the back of the ambulance truck are local officials, and they're pointing out different spots along the way of, well, this is the house where my grandma used to live, this is the house where I was born, this is the house where we used to get together on Sundays after church, and they're just kind of sharing a lot of, family stories that, made you feel good, except for the fact that the houses weren't staying there anymore. We're looking at barren lots, empty slabs, empty lots where there was nothing standing. A lot of their homes were literally pushed up to the edge of the Intercoastal Waterway.
We started driving down there, and about halfway through Cameron, I started seeing houses out in the middle of the marsh, miles from anything. The houses that had literally been picked up and pushed inland.
So we finally got down to one of the barns for the ambulance crew, and a lot of their equipment was stored up on a second and a third story of the barn. And so we went up there and took their supplies out, and we brought it back up here to the upper part of Cameron Parish. As we're driving through the downtown sections of Cameron, it gets, it was overwhelming to see the amount of devastation, to see, people's livelihood, their homes, their businesses, their schools, their libraries, their places of worship. Everything's gone.
The businesses there were completely gone. The school there, literally, it looked like something had blown from the south to the north. The east-west walls were still there, which was interesting on these buildings. But the north-south walls, it looked like somebody had drove a tractor trailer through the whole building, and the building was completely wiped out, except for, actually, they had a roof and the east-west walls.
And these people were very resilient. No one was emotional. Everyone was just kind of factual, pointing out things down there for me. And when I left the crew, after we got back to the wildlife refuge, and I was driving back to the office, and they were going back to work, it really, a sense of overcoming emotion came over me. I started to cry just because of the sadness to see that amount of damage to people's livelihood and to their lives. It was great news that we had no lives lost down in Cameron Parish, but to see the fact that everyone was going to have to rebuild from square one was just terribly upsetting to look at, and to be able to be there live and see it you felt like you were in a war zone.
There's a place called Holly Beach. Holly Beach had, probably 300, 400 homes, something like that, and 20, 30 businesses in that area. And when we were driving down to Holly Beach, we got to Holly Beach, and I remember there was absolutely nothing left of Holly Beach. I'm sorry, there was a telephone pole. Telephone pole that was kind of bent over like this. And that's when the expression, wiped clean by the hand of God, came in. And I remember thinking, oh, I understand now. Everything was gone. There wasn't a stick of wood left. The only thing that was left to identify that somebody or some community was there was a lone telephone pole. And the other thing that really took my breath away was I remember coming to this church, and at this church there was graveyards. You could tell it was a graveyard, and the stone heads were still there. What was really, I just couldn't believe it was the hurricane had come in there and dug up the graves. All the graves were gone. The caskets were gone. Everything was gone. The only thing that showed you there was a grave there was a concrete little box there where the casket sat in, and the gravestones. The gravestones were knocked over, and that was it. And I remember the debris line, so everything went up there and it floated up there. And I remember they were talking about trying to find the bodies. I'm not sure whatever happened with them finding the bodies of those that were buried there.
Me and Roger, we went back to the bluff, Moss Bluff, to check on our homes and John Traer's. And just trees, power lines, shingles everywhere, and trying to dodge some of the leaning power poles. That was overwhelming. Quite not as overwhelming as if once when you got to the coast. I did not take that initial trip, and I heard others did, and they had different reactions. But just going back to Moss Bluff, which is normally a 30-minute drive, it took about an hour because, of course, all the electricities were out, power poles were leaning, power lights and light signals were hanging across the road. Honestly, we were lucky to get back there.
Actually, I got a ride with this, the sheriff deputy that was with us. I was one of the first people to actually get out and try to drive around the roadway because he lived pretty close to where I live. So I was like, hey, let's just go out and ride and see if we can see how our buildings, fared or whatever. And it was kind of interesting just because driving down the road, it was just so many trees down. So it was on an obstacle course trying to go around the trees that were covering the roadways and the power lines that were down.
As I started to venture out, I could see, looking back at the apartment complex as I pulled away from it, the roof was just stripped down to the plywood. I mean, all the tar paper and shingles were just, blown out. There were some windows broken, but actually the complex itself held up pretty well. And I remember driving down Lake Street, and there were trees that had fallen, but it looked like, either citizens or, utility crews or something had already been by and sort of cut the branches so that you could at least get around and pass. Now, I mean, you couldn't drive in a straight line. You had to do a lot of weaving. And I do remember sort of crossing my fingers every time I drove over a down power line. I figured they weren't energized, but you never know. And so that was something of a risk. Obviously, I was worried about running over a nail or something like that, getting a flat tire. and I made it here and was able to get in touch with my wife. She actually called before I had the chance to call her. And, you know, she'd been watching the news reports, you know, from Lafayette, and as the media are prone to do, they kind of were overstating the amount of damage that had been done to the terminal building. You know, saying it was basically destroyed. It had basically suffered the same amount of damage, or a similar amount of damage, as my apartment complex, and that the roof was basically just stripped of shingles and tar paper. I mean, the structure was still there, but you could see that it had suffered some roof damage. But, you know, the media were reporting that the terminal was destroyed, you know, at the airport. So she was kind of panicking, wanting to know if I was okay. And so she was very relieved when I was able to talk to her and, you know, tell her I was okay.
A lot of fencing down, but somehow my DirecTV dish survived, which was interesting.
What really took me by surprise, I guess, was the amount of destruction to the electrical grid. Just seeing that many utility poles taken down was a bit surprising. I didn't think we would be without power for like a week. You know, I mean, that was pretty nuts. So
driving back and forth, like almost like a ghost town, or at night, sitting outside and seeing no city lights on whatsoever. It was almost like you were isolated from everywhere, from civilization.
It was interesting, especially at night, because we were pretty much the only area that had any lights. So, I mean, it was right here at our office. You looked around on the horizon, there was not any lights. It was just very kind of a lonely feeling almost.
Even 5 days after I was leaving during the evening, everybody was dark all the way to probably Crawley. There was no lights. Everybody was still out of power, for the most part, 5 days after, pretty much across all of Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Texas. And that's probably the eeriest feeling, to go outside at night and see absolutely no light in the distance. And I was lucky. I did not have major damage to my house. A number of people I known had most of the roof stripped off, and their house was unlivable for months. Or a tree went through their house. I mean, you can't live in your house where there's a tree in the middle of it.
I have trees out there on my property. Probably about 40% of the trees are blown over, pine trees. And some of the trees weren't blown over. They were blown, they started out straight up like this, and they ended up almost at about from vertical, they ended up at about a 20-degree angle. And they're still there because I think they're cool. I mean, they're living, but they're like, now the pine tree is like 5 feet off the ground and growing sideways. And it's kind of cool because it looks artsy craftsy now. At least that's what I'm telling myself.
The atmosphere after a hurricane passes through is miserable. It's just hot, it's humid. We had an influx of mosquitoes. I mean, like big marsh mosquitoes. And it's, you know, it's not a pleasant environment to have to live in without air conditioning. And so, you know, obviously once the scale of the damage to the power grid became apparent, we knew that it was going to be a long time. Most people stayed at the office and slept here. And I was no exception to that. You know, we just sort of found, you know, whatever quiet place you could. You know, obviously, you know, there was activity and operations at all times. So you sort of had to find whatever little nook and cranny or small room that you could find.
I think the thing I remember most, oddly enough, isn't necessarily from the storm itself. I guess because I've worked so many hurricanes in my career, they kind of all blend together now. But I remember just all the people that were here and for how long everybody was here and the people basically living here in the week or so after the storm. And this office had a certain camaraderie that was really neat in the days afterward because we were all here. We're all living together and kind of relying on each other for everything.
For the first couple of days, it wasn't so bad, but after a while, I mean, it's just, you know, having to stay in the same building with just the same people. And basically for that whole week, I mean, really, Calcasieu Parish was basically shut down. They weren't allowing anybody back in, you know, because just letting the power crews or the people coming in to like remove the trees from the roadways and the power lines and stuff. They try to get the power back up. So they basically told everybody to stay away. So it was basically just very few of us here in Calcasieu Parish.
It's kind of, I guess, something of a novelty to be living at the office for like a day or two. But once you get to like day 3, day 4, day 5, it's like, come on, you know, I mean, it can get old real quick.
I know people were living in this office for about 2 to 3 weeks. There was stuff everywhere. I mean, there was people sleeping probably where I'm sitting right here, in this very room. People sleeping in the back comms room. Things really didn't come back to normal until probably the end of October and November. And that's just operation-wise. Our daily lives, of course, we were still people. Some people didn't have livable houses. Some people had to stay in a FEMA trailer.
And, you know, here at the office, they'd sort of jerry-rigged something up in the men's bathroom and the stall where they could shower off in there. And, you know, I just thought, well, as long as I have, you know, at least some warm water at the apartment, I think I'd rather shower at the apartment than the office.
They hooked a shower up in the men's bathroom, and I swore I was not going to take a shower when it was in there. I was just like, ugh. So I did. I actually managed to avoid a shower for probably about 3 or 4 days before I just felt so gross I could not take it anymore. So I had to bite the bullet and go in there and just take a quick shower and kind of clean up. But yeah, it's not something I would want to go through again. And it didn't help too right after the storm hit. That was one of the weird things that happened here was we actually lost our bathrooms for about a day and a half, something like that. Woke up the next morning and I was in there and I tried to flush the toilet and it didn't flush. And I was like, I told somebody about it and they were like, oh, yeah, I don't think our bathrooms are working because they're tied to the airport power. And the airport power was down and they didn't have a backup. So we were kind of without the use of our bathrooms for a few days.
I didn't get much sleep at all during that week. So, and also, you know, taking the showers, you're trying to you have like 20 people trying to take a shower with one little, you know, shower head in the men's bathroom. So you had to wait for that, wait in line and so forth like that, and hope that someone didn't take a half-hour shower or something like that.
You know, the office was pretty much out of commission from an operational standpoint anyway. You know, we were fielding a lot of phone calls, you know, still briefing emergency responders. Most of our phone calls were from people who had evacuated and were wanting to know when they could come back. And, you know, we would just tell them, you know, look, you don't want to come back. You know, it's not a pleasant place to be. You know, not only was there, you know, still a lot of debris, you know, lying around, you know, some people got flat tires here at the office from running over nails and stuff, but nothing was open. You know, there's no electricity. I mean, it took a few days before before the utility company was able to actually turn power on to parts of the city. You know, and they kind of prioritize it, you know. Obviously, they want to get the emergency services back up first, but, you know, so we were just telling them, you know, no, you don't want to be here. You really, really don't. You know, and I can understand the curiosity. I mean, they want to know how their property fared. And, you know, we would tell them, you know, as best we could, you know, what we saw when we were driving out.
But, apparently we were about one of the few government agencies that were answering the phone, so we were getting all kinds of calls from Red Cross, you name it, and we were redirecting people, that kind of thing.
One of the things I found interesting was we started getting a lot of calls from folks in New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Illinois, and stuff like that. They had their relatives in these assisted living homes, and or they were living down there in these different parishes, and they wanted to know about their relatives, how they were doing. And as odd as it sounds, since we didn't really have anything to do, we started taking the names of these individuals and finding out what parish they lived in, what street they were on, or what assisted living home they were in, and calling up the emergency manager and trying to figure out where these individuals were located at, or what happened to the assisted living, because they generally got in buses and they moved up to someplace in Rapides Parish or northward, and stayed up there in the assisted living, other assisted living places, so that they could do that, or stayed at hospitals. Anyway, we'd call them back and say, oh yeah, by the way, I found your mom, she's doing fine, you can call her at this number here. And it was something we could do to help the community out, even though we were no longer in the forecasting business. The first day I get back here, no, it's actually the second day I get back here, this van pulls in from Southern Region. And on this big, huge van with pulling the trailer, they had generators. And so anybody could take a generator, and they had gas too. So anybody could take a generator and bring it to their house and put it up and start it up and keep your refrigerator and freezer and stuff like that going. So that was very nice of them.
And they basically bought a lot of materials like tarping houses, the roof tarping. Although I think mine was about the last one done, so I didn't get my total roof tarp, but I kind of started to run out of supplies. But and just a lot of water, some very non-perishable type food items. I think we actually got an ice machine also, I think. Maybe even a washer and dryer, something like that we either had them buy for us or whatever, so we could actually do laundry here.
But that's not the really cool thing. The really cool thing is they brought ice cold beer.
They brought us some beer too, so that I guess to relieve some of the stress, you'd when you're off shift, go out there near a picnic table outside and have a couple of beers during happy hour. So
that was after all that we've been through, it was nice to see Southern Region understood that a good beer after work would do wonders for the crew.
We'd been living off of non-perishable food for about 3 or 4 days. One of the first people that came back to town after the storm had hit was the Domino's people. They got their, the one on Lake Street got their business going again, and basically they got in there and they started, I guess, trying to use up a lot of the food. It hadn't gone bad yet. They were trying to make pizzas. Basically, every size that they made was $10. They were just basically, here, you give us $10, we give you a pizza, and they were getting a lot of business after the storm because they were the only place you could go and buy actual fresh, hot food, and it seemed so good at the time. We weren't getting tired of pizza. We were going in and ordering, about 10 pizzas at a time and bringing it back to the office for people to eat.
Your credit cards are absolutely worthless. Your checkbooks are absolutely worthless. The only thing that has of any value is money, because there is nothing working. There's no electronics working. You don't walk into Walmart because it's dark, and the registers don't work anyway.
And how long was it before grocery stores and other...
It was about I want to say maybe about a week. Probably about a week or so. I remember going to Albertsons for the first time after the storm, maybe about a week after it hit, and I've never seen so many people in Albertsons in my life. I mean, it was probably everybody, not only from Calcasieu Parish, but Cameron and Vermilion. All the people who had come up this way had gone in there to start buying food again whenever everything was open. And they had every checkout open. The lines were down the aisles. You couldn't get a cart. I mean, only a few people had carts, so most people were having to just grab as much as they could carry to the checkout line, and the lines were like way long. It was just, I've never seen anything like it.
Now, how long was it before you had power restored to your house?
Probably about a week and a half. It was so nice to have TV again, and I was watching some crappy reality show just because I was thrilled to have a TV going, and it was pretty annoying stuff I would never watch.
We ended up, they had this program where people would come out and put blue roofs. And it's probably the other memory that I remember for the next 6 months. Everybody had blue tarp roofs, because it was basically, if you had roof damage, you would come out and put some tarp over your roof so you couldn't get further water damage until you could repair the roof. Well, mine, again, was about 2.5 months I had that blue roof. And some people, I saw blue roofs until 2007.
You know, that's one of the things after you go through a major disaster, there's a limited number of people in the community that can put things back together for you, and there's a limited amount of supplies as well. So, like for me personally, I had hired some contractors that had come down here from Arkansas looking for work. And so there's really very limited guarantees in the job or how well it's going to be when you're hiring people from out of the area that don't have any. You're not setting a contract. You're just kind of getting supplies for them, and they're going up on the roof and putting it together for you. And then 2 weeks later, you have no idea where they are.
And there was a song that Christmas, something like a Blue Roof Christmas. I think that was what the song was, Blue Roof Christmas. And you could drive along in Lake Charles, and you see these homes, beautiful homes and blue roofs. Because one thing was at a premium was roofers. I asked the gentleman who roofed my house, could you, come back and put a new roof on? Whereupon he said, sure, you're on page 12 now, and there's 30 people on each page, and there's 3 people that's doing it. That didn't work out. So 6 months later, I'm talking to my accountant, and he has a crew that just did his. They came down from Dallas-Fort Worth area. There was like 25 of them. And they came into my house and tore off all the shingles and put new shingles on, and they did it in under 5 hours. I was impressed. I was very impressed.
Yes, my roof still leaks.
You see this? This is Rita. Rita did this. It kick-started it. Ike finished it.
So do you think your area has recovered in the 10 years since Rita?
Have we recovered? Yes. Is there, not only has it recovered, but we've got more businesses, we've gotten more homes in the area, and the area continues to grow. If you look at Lake Charles today, it's one of the areas of the country that's exploding in growth. Businesses that we've never seen in Lake Charles are just being built all over the place. And then Westlake and then Sulphur, and in 10 years from now, you won't even recognize it.